Let's learn how to use JavaScript functions. A function is simply a group of code that you can reuse and call in your JavaScript program or your HTML file, as long as you're in a script tag. And what this does for you is it eliminates the need for you to go and rewrite a same piece of code over and over again. If you ever catch yourself writing that same piece of code, that should imply to you, you ought to make a JavaScript function and you write it once, but then you call it multiple times. And that will cut down on the amount of code you have, the amount of code that you have to write, and make your program more reusable. It also allows us to maintain the code and make it more easier for you to find out if there's problems with the code. So how do we write a function? The first thing you have to do is you have to define that function. So let's go create an HTML file, file, new file, and actually before I do that, just make sure that you've opened up a folder that you're working with, wherever you've been doing all of your programs, and that way you have that folder that you can use and store all of your data. So now that we're in here, I'm going to close these other files I have open. Let's do a file, new file, and let's save it. File, save as, and I'm going to call mine functionfun.html. And then I'll go ahead and put the usual HTML that we have in all of our files. And we'll go ahead and put a head section. We might or might not use it. And we'll put a body section. And we want to write our JavaScript function now. We're going to go ahead and do all that in our head section. So within the head section, we want to go ahead and put a script tag. And then inside of that script tag is where we want to write our JavaScript function. Now remember, if I had JavaScript in a script tag just like this, and if I ran that web page, this script automatically gets executed and this code would run, and you'd see a pop-up box that says the word hello. If I created a variable here, sname equals Mickey, and I said hello sname, and I saved that and I ran this file, it would automatically execute a pop-up box and say hello Mickey. In fact, let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and add a space there so it looks a little bit better. I'll save that and I'll run that, and it says hello Mickey right there. Okay, and that's because in JavaScript, when you put it inside of a script tag, if it's not in its own function, it automatically will execute. So what I could do instead is I could write my own JavaScript function. And once again, remember, I like to put my curly braces on multiple lines. So this is now a JavaScript function. You say the word function, you give it a name, and then you put parenthesis, parenthesis. We'll find out what that means a little bit later. And then you have your curly brace, which says begin the function and end the function. Now, if I went ahead and saved this, and I ran this JavaScript one more time, let's see if it automatically executes. Last time we had an alert box. This one doesn't do anything. Well, maybe there's a problem. Control-Shift-I, the console, no problems at all. And so what that tells me is that if you write JavaScript code and you put it inside a function, it's like having food storage, and it's just sitting out there and waiting for you to use someday in case you need it. And so it will not automatically execute unless you actually say you want it to execute. So how do we make it execute? Well, let's do that. So let's come down to the body and let's go ahead and add an input, and let's say type is equal to button, And we want to say if you ever click on that button, we want to do something. We want to go run the JavaScript function greeting. And let's go ahead and give that button a value of click me. So this says we're going to have a button on our HTML form, and on that button you're going to see the word click me show up, and if you ever click on the button you want to go execute that code, which would then jump up to your script tag and find the function with that name and run the code. Let's go ahead and save it and see if that works. Here's the button, click me. Click on it. There's our pop-up box. So now what we've done is we've said, for this HTML button, if you ever click on it, go run a function called greeting. In other words, go find a piece of code that I've already written that I want to reuse over and over. And then it looks through all your code and says, do you have a function called greeting? Yeah, right here. Okay, well, run the code inside of it. Could I do this? Could I have more than one function? Greeting, and then we'll say the word goodbye. And we'll just say alert. See you later. And let's copy our button. Let's change the click me to say say hi, and we'll change this one, say bye, and this function will go to the goodbye function. So now we have two buttons on there. Whoops, let's make sure we close that, and let's go ahead and add a couple of breaks. So let's save this and run it one more time. We should see two buttons show up. One that says say hi, hello Mickey, and one that says say bye, see you later. And so you can have multiple functions inside of your JavaScript, and they're just sitting out there and waiting for you to execute these. So could we do something like this? Instead of having our functions in the script tag, could we actually send them to a different file? Let's create a brand new file. File, new file. File, save as. And let's call it myfunctions.js for JavaScript. Click on save. And let's come back over to here. We'll cut the functions out and go to JavaScript, paste them in. Now if you notice, I did not include the script tag. I didn't include the script tag because this is just going to be a JavaScript function or a file that has a whole bunch of JavaScript. What we need to do then is come back over to here, and we need to say we want to go ahead and bring that file in for me to use. So you say script src equals myfunctions.js. Let's put this on one line, more of a standard. So this now gives me the ability to bring a whole file into my HTML, and then I can call that still even though it's not in the file. Let's see if it still works then. Let's see if it knows where to go find that function and that function, even though they're not inside of the HTML file. So we'll run it one more time, and let's click on say hi, and it still found it. Say bye, still found it. So this now allows you to have your own JavaScript file, and you can put a whole bunch of functions in there, like your food storage, and just leave them out there for you to use when you need to call them. And that's a great way to organize your data, organize your program, make it more readable, make it easier to maintain. Well, let's try something else. Now that we've written a function, and now that we've called the function, And now that we've stored that function in a JavaScript file and we've included that in our program so that we can call, what if we had another input, and in that input maybe we had a value that we wanted to pass to this greeting. So we could do something like this. What if I said Mickey and mouse? So now what we're saying is, when you called the greeting function, go pass 2 pieces of data to that function. Notice we just separate it by a comma. Now if we go take a look at the greeting, we're saying there's nothing coming in right now. There's nothing there. So what would happen if we ran this, even though we don't have anything coming into that function? In other words, over here inside the parentheses, that's what the function expects to receive. They're called parameters or arguments. And it's saying, I want you to give me something. But in this case it says, I don't need anything. I'm just a parenthesis. You don't need to give me anything to do my work. So let's see what happens if we try to give it something, but it's telling us we don't need anything. Now in other languages, this would blow up. This would cause an error. So I'm going to go ahead and make this my current browser, and let's run this one more time and see what happens. Say hi. It still works. So that's really interesting, because if you used other programming languages, if you try to pass data to a function and it doesn't receive anything here, and you still try to give it something, the system would say, I don't know what you're doing. So let's try this now. Let's say we have 2 variables that we actually want to receive, and we'll call it s first and s last. And we're going to get rid of this line, and we're now going to say hello s first plus a space plus s last. So now this function greeting says, if you ever call me, I'm expecting you to give me information, and then I can use those information in my curly braces of my function. It's almost like you're creating variables right here, like you have the word var first and the word var last, but you don't need to say the word var. And these variables, s first and s last, will now live for the length of this function. You can use them inside your code. So here we say, call the greeting, pass Mickey to whoever the first parameter is, which is s first, and let's pass mouse to whoever the second parameter is, which is s last. Let's run that one more time and see what happens. Say hi, and it says hello Mickey Mouse. What would happen if we only passed 1 parameter to the function that's expecting 2 parameters? Let's see what happens. Go back to your HTML. Remember, you can't go live on JavaScript. It has to go live on HTML files. Let's go live and see what happens. Click. Now it says, hello Mickey, undefined. Well, why is that other one undefined? It's because we said we only passed 1 value to the function. This said it's expecting 2 values. So it leaves this one as undefined. Let's go ahead and put this back to where we pass 2 values. And let's come back over to our functions and let's write one more function. We'll say function greeting, and we're not going to pass any parameters this time. Alert, does this work? Question mark. Oops, let's make sure we spell greeting correct right there. So now we have 2 functions, and JavaScript, did you notice it had a little light bulb there? Let me see if I can take that out. Let me save it one more time and paste it back in. And it had a light bulb that was saying, you probably should move this to a new file. And I have the name greeting used more than once. There's our light bulb. Show the fixes. The fix is move to a new file. And that's because even though I have different parameters, or we call that a signature in other languages, the system is not very happy about that in JavaScript because it's saying you already have a JavaScript function. So if I did this, and let's come over here, let's wipe out that so there's no parameters. Let's go and run this one more time, and let's see what happens. Does this work? Now that's really interesting, isn't it? Because JavaScript wasn't really happy about that. But when we use this, it looked for a function that matched it. And it matched it because there were no parameters being called. Let's come back to here. Let's do this one more time. And now let's see which function it calls. Does it call this one with no parameters? Or does it call this one with 2 parameters? Let's try to run that one more time and see what happens. Remember, we're running the button that now has 2 parameters, and we're going to try to find out, does it go to this one, which is what happened last time when there were no parameters, or will it go to this one? Let's run it. Say hi. Ah, it still went down to the second one. So in other languages, we can do what they call overloading of functions. And based upon the parameters or the signatures, the system is smart enough to know which one to call. In JavaScript, it simply says, I'm going to go to the very last function that you created if there's more than one function with the same name. And so that's why you're getting that light bulb that says, move to a new file. So let's get rid of this one. Now we're back to one function with greeting and one function goodbye. The last thing we want to try is what happens if we want to give some data back to somebody else. And so functions not only can do work. Remember when we called greeting Mickey Mouse, we do work because we come over to here, we find the function, we check to see if there's any parameters. If so, we fill them in, and then we do our work. But functions can also give something back if somebody ever does something. So let's come back to our function, and let's pass one more parameter to it, and we'll call it salutation right here. And notice that right now this is bold, this is not bold, not a solid heavy black, and that's because over here it's trying to let us know we're only passing 2 values. Let's pass one more value, and we'll say Mickey is M for male. Let's come back over to here, and we need to use this somewhere in here for this to go black, and let's write another function. And we'll say function check salutation, spelled correctly. And we'll call it, you can call that variable anything you want. So we now wrote another function in here called sValue, or it's check salutation with a variable called sValue. And what we want to do is we want to say if sValue is equal to M, then we want to say return Mr. period. Else if sValue equals F, return Mrs. Else return, and we'll just return an empty string. And now we want to try to call that function. So what could we do? We could say sSalutation, that's the variable that we created up here in our parameter, is equal to check salutation sSalutation. So this now says it's going to receive a value, and then we're going to go call this function, pass that value received. It will then go into this variable, and this variable only lives for the life of that function. We can then check the value of that variable and then give something back. And when we give something back, that means somebody should be over here waiting to catch it. Now, we're just using the same variable name. We don't have to do that. We could have created a brand new variable right here, var soutput, or whatever you want to call it. And we could have said soutput right there, soutput plus. And so this would say call the function check salutation, pass whatever you have in this variable. That value goes into this variable. We check its value, and then we give a value back to somebody who's waiting for it over here. And you do that with the assignment operator. And now you receive whatever this function wants to give back. You can only return one value in a function. There's only one. This is interesting. If you take a look at this return double quote, it gives you some warnings saying, you know, this isn't really looking very good. One thing I think I always like to do is that on my if statements, I like to use curly braces, even if I have only one statement, but I like to do that because it avoids any problems and any errors that I could make. So let's see what happens now if we run this. Over here, remember we said pass Mickey and mouse and an M. So Mickey should go into S first, mouse should go there, and M should go into salutation. We then drop into here and say call the function check salutation, pass whatever is in this variable, which is M, go to that value, check that value, and give a value back. So let's see if it returns MR period to the S output variable, and then if we can print that data out. Come back over to here. Let's go ahead and save our program, and let's run it. And while we're running it, we're going to press Control-Shift-I, and we want to go ahead and look at our sources, and we want to bring up our function. I just clicked, here's our little file right here that I just brought up, our function fun, so that we can see it. And I want to set a breakpoint. So I just click on the number 9 there, and that says if you ever execute or click on this button, then we want to go and step into our code. I could also bring up my JavaScript function and set a breakpoint. I clicked on number 5 and clicked on it. Notice you can't click on 3 because that's where you're creating variables. They don't let you set a breakpoint when you create a variable. So now I clicked on number 5 to set a breakpoint, and that says if you ever get to this line, you're going to stop and wait for the computer to catch up. So let's come back over to here. We'll click on say hi. It says I'm waiting for you to now tell me what to do. See how it says pause in the debugger? I'm waiting for you to tell me what to do. Click on this button, step. It now comes over to here. S output is undefined right now. Here's check salutation. If I click step, it will just execute this whole line. If I click step into the next function call, which is this icon, then here's the function, and it will step into this function, and I can now execute that line by line. So let's try that. Step. We now drop into this variable, or into this function. Step. S value is equal to M. We want to return MR. This allows me to say, go ahead and execute the rest of the function and continue your program. So executes the rest of this, gets out of that function, and once you hit a return statement, you leave the function, and then it continues on. This button allows you to just continue running. And that actually worked. Hello, Mr. Space, Mickey Mouse. So, what did we learn from that? We learned that you can call functions, you can pass values to functions, and functions can return data back. You don't have to, though. Notice that this function does not have a return statement. Let's do something that cleans this up a little bit better. Return value. And we want that to be a variable. Instead of saying 3 returns, what I could now do is something like this. I've got a typo in that, so I need to fix that. Sorry. Return value equals that. Return as return value. Now if you notice, this cleans it up a little bit because I only have one return statement. If you think of drawing flowcharts, this actually is a lot cleaner in a flowchart because there's only one in and one out. One in and one out. And so this is something I do to make my code more maintainable and more readable. Let's run it one more time, make sure it still works. Come over to here, and I need to actually make sure that I am on the HTML file because you can't execute JavaScript code. So I'm on the HTML. Let's go live. Say hi. Hello, Mickey Mouse. So that's how you work with functions. How you can assign a function to a click event for a button. How you can write a function that says I receive values or I don't receive values. How you can call a function passing a value and waiting to return some piece of data back and assign the return value to a variable. And then how you can actually return data back to whoever called you.